Hello there. In these little talks we've been having at breakfast in the last few weeks, so far we have discovered, first of all, that God created everything, and He created us humans to assist Him in the general management of the things He created. The second thing we learned was that God has set up certain arrangements by which we may relate to Him. They have changed a little bit over time, but we found that in these last days God has set up an arrangement which we call the New Covenant, in which God actually indwells us and writes His laws on our inward parts, on our hearts and minds, from within. So it's a very intimate relationship. Thirdly, we have discovered that all this happens because God has sent the Holy Spirit to planet Earth, who surrounds us, baptizes us, but also is in us, in our innermost being, and from there He can break out into the area where we're thinking and feeling things, so that we may have ongoing communication with Him. Now, the last three talks I'm going to talk about how this all works in practice. So far we've done the background, the principles that are operating. Now we're going to look at how all this happens from day to day in the lives of human beings. And I need to start off by saying that at varying stages in your life, the operation changes quite significantly. There are three fundamental periods in your life. The first we can call the training and development phase. And that happens between the age of 0 to the age of 30. The training and development phase. The second phase is when you become a minister on God's behalf for training up the next generation. So you go through a training period and then you become a trainer of other people. The last phase we can call the phase of the overseer, where we actually have duties, not to be worrying about other people, but worrying about God, because God Himself has got a program for advancing His project on the planet, and in the last period of oversight, we particularly spend our time listening to what God has got in mind, and so that we can join Him in helping Him in establishing His ongoing program of taking authority over what belongs to Him, the planet and all of it, all the things that were in it. So let's start off by talking about the time which we call the training and development period. Now, within that period there are 4 stages. The first stage begins when we are born, and we come into the cosmos from the womb into a brand new world. Now, I'm going to mention in passing that this training and development program is fundamentally about training up our minds, our psychological development. So the first stage when we are born is we are very much in the care of our parents, and they instruct us in 3 basic learning experiences. First of all is self-management. Self-management includes things like potty training and just keeping your hands off a hot stove and things of that nature. The second thing that we learn is social arrangements. We learn to say please and thank you, and how things operate within the household in relation to the other people that surround us. And the third thing that happens a little bit later is we develop language, and we develop language competence. Now, all of this is directed at what St. Augustine called the anima. The anima is simply the life force. It is to do with perception. If you have the life within you, then if you're alive, in other words, you immediately are involved in the business of perception, seeing things, touching things with 5 senses, hearing things, tasting things. So this first 5 years of your life, first 6 years of your life nearly, we are totally involved with perception. The first year of your life, you watch a baby. very interesting to watch a baby in the first year of their life. They sit there staring at the world around them. They're saying, "What's that? What's that? What am I seeing? How do I relate to that?" And it takes about a year before the baby really gets past that, just initial stage of locating itself with the things around her. I remember I have a granddaughter, and she, when she was a year old, I went across to their place to visit, and I walked in the door and she leapt up off the floor and said, "Grandpa, Grandpa, Grandpa." And I realised it wasn't that she was so pleased to see me, it was that she had recognised me. That is Grandpa. And that was a fantastic thing. And from that moment forward, she moved into the stage of social management and so forth, into language. It's an amazing thing, but any child can learn any language at that age. You can learn the most complicated languages if you're in that environment. I remember that some of the people that I knew in South Africa were brought up by, not by so much by their parents, but by their maid, who was an African and spoke an African language to them. And very often the children were, at that age, 4 to 5, were more capable of speaking the African language than they were of their parents' language. Now they soon forgot it, which is a pity probably, but by making the point that at that age we have incredible skills and ability within us to work with language. Now God is involved in that. How is God involved in that? Well, he is involved in it, but the young person doesn't actually understand that. How should we introduce God to them at this stage? Simply through family prayers. They don't have the consciousness of what God is or what the significance of that. But they are starting to understand that God is there. Just like they're perceiving the other things, and they know that when Grandpa is not there, that he's still there, if you know what I mean. They understand that God is there. That's all. A very simple anima, perception, God exists. And they do that by family prayers. And some people, as they get languages, teach them little prayers when they go to bed. And they don't understand what the prayer means, but this is the first encounter they have, laying the foundation of the existence of God. Okay, now when we get to 6, we get second teeth, but that's just a sign that there's a psychological change. And from this stage, we're dealing with something which Augustine calls the animus. Now the anima is just perception, but the animus is seeing something and thinking about, what is that I'm seeing? We start to, this is an age when we start to collect things because we become interested in all things around us. The Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget said that this is the age from 6 to 11 when we involved in concrete operations. And we start to think about that bird is different from that bird. That stone is different from that stone. This is an incredibly active period when we're out there in the world actually thinking about what we're seeing. Not just seeing, but thinking about what we're seeing at what the Cologne School of Psychology called the first level of thought, and St. Augustine called the animus. And it's a very, very good time. Look, children are not theorising at this age, but all they're doing is really working out how to categorise and put into place the things that are around them in a systematic way. Interestingly enough, at age 9 and 10 is the best age for people to learn about money and how to manage it. Because they're not only just looking at things and thinking about things, but they're involved in what, as I said, I call concrete operations. We're actually doing things. We can go out and collect stones. We can go out and look at birds through binoculars. We can go out and plant peas in the garden. We can do all sorts of practical things which are very, very valuable groundwork for what's to come. The animus, stage 2 development, concrete operations. Now how is God relating to this development at stage 2? Answer, God is there in creation. They are seeing God in creation. They're not seeing him as a person up in the sky. They're seeing all the things, wonderful things that God has made. And our education system should be built around that. I'm talking about parents responsibility in education. You should be showing your child what God has made and how brilliant God is, how the creator of the universe. You can feed them Bible stories if you like, but they don't mean anything to children between 6 and 12. I mean, you can have David and Goliath because they'll enjoy the story of the fight and the stones and all that stuff. But what is important is to take them out into the creation and to show them what isn't God good? Isn't God fantastic? That's what they need to learn at that age about God. Okay. Now the third stage occurs when we get to about 11 or 12 years of age. And it's a very distinct change in psychology. And it's recognised by all ethnic groups around the world. The most obvious one is the Jewish bar mitzvah. But in Africa also, amongst tribes, they have a ceremony when they take children into initiation schools at that age, recognising that something important is happening in the child's psychology. Now, Augustine said this is an introduction to what he called the intellectus, the intellectual side of our psyche. And it is very important at this stage to recognise that young people develop innate questions within themselves which are very hard to verbalise, but they need to be answered if that person is to go forward. The sad tragedy is that many children are never given the opportunity to think through these questions, and they're never satisfied for the whole life. If they don't get them answered when they're early teens, they'll never ever be satisfied, and there'll always be a searching, looking for something which they can't find. And the questions are not defined well. That's the problem. And it's very important to understand that God has made a way for not only the questions to be defined, but for the answers. And those answers and questions are found in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 11, chapter 1 to chapter 11. If we take a child through those, well, a young teenager now, through those chapters, everything will come into place. Those chapters not only formalise their questions, but they also give them the answers. Now, I've tried to do that in a school class, but it's very difficult because very often the parents' attitudes to creation is very different than mine, and creates a conflict between the child and their parents and the teacher. So it's very important that the parent, a loving parent or grandparent, takes the child through those chapters at that age. Because if they've taken through those chapters, all the questions they have, who is God, who am I worthwhile, what does God think of me, all those sorts of questions are answered thoroughly in laying a foundation of historical foundation, and a foundation for that person's ongoing development is established through the study of the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. So for the first time, we can introduce biblical study. I said you can have biblical stories before that, but this is a genuine looking at the scriptures in order to find information. Now, how does God get involved in that? Well, God's wish and will is that a person in their early teens should find him as a personal friend. This is the time for a person to connect with God, with the Holy Spirit, and find within themselves, I am here. St. Augustine described his own experience of this. He said, I looked at nature, stage 1. I thought about what I was seeing, stage 2. And then I thought, what value is that thing got? Is it beautiful? Is it worthwhile? And I cried out within me because I didn't know. I didn't have the standards. And suddenly from within him, the Holy Spirit said, I'm here. And from that moment forward, he was able to walk with the Lord in the revelations that come from the Godhead as to the quality of what we're seeing. So that is a very important connection. If a person doesn't make that connection, they go past the intellectus to the fourth stage without the benefit of revelatory knowledge, and how important that is to us. So really I want to encourage you that stage 3, take the child through chapter 1 to 11 of Genesis in a loving environment in the home. Don't hurry, just go through it quietly, and so that they understand, and they'll come out of that knowing who they are and where they're going. But more important, the Holy Spirit will meet them. My own daughter, I took her through those chapters. After I'd done that, in our Sunday little house meeting, she said to the folk, you know, I've been studying the patriarchs with Dad, and now I know who I am and where I'm going. And the next Pentecost Sunday, she went to a church camp, and God met her there. She spent 2 hours on the floor and got up knowing thoroughly who she was, who God was, and that He loved her, and He was become a personal friend from that time forward. Cannot say how important that is at that age, and what God intends to do to bring Himself into relationship. You see, the person in their early teens ceases to be the child of their parents. They become an individual. If you ask a 10-year-old, who are you, they'll say, oh, I'm John and Judy's son. But when you ask the same person at 14 who they, they'll say, I am, and they'll give their name. They have become a person. Okay. Now the fourth stage is a very interesting stage, and the stage we're talking about involves two things. What Augustine called the ratio and the mens. Now the ratio is the power of reasoning. So far we've got perception, we're seeing things, we're thinking about what we're seeing, we're discerning about what we're seeing. Thirdly, we've got the help of the Holy Spirit in assessing the value of things. But the next stage is reasoning. What can we do with those things? What can we understand about those things? And then once we've come to a rational decision, we can use the mens, which is the spring of action, to actually take some action. So the fourth phase is a time of development in which we start to take information and start to exercise, start to plan what we can do with that information and taking action to actually achieve it. And this starts at about age 16, 17 and goes on to about 26. Now the Holy Spirit's activity in that stage is to walk with us through that process. We're not concentrating on spiritual things, we're concentrating on practical things, but we sometimes are doing it without even knowing it, but the Holy Spirit is walking alongside us, helping us, opening doorways for us, giving us information in the intellectus, revelatory knowledge, so that we may learn new things and propose new theories. You see, all the great scientists of history presented their new theories in this age group. Isaac Newton, when he developed his laws of motion and gravity and so forth, forces. He was 22 when he presented himself at the Cambridge University to Cavendish. And Cavendish was so amazed that he resigned as being professor and made Isaac Newton the professor. I think that was a bit over the top, but I'm making the point that Isaac Newton developed those theories when he was 22 years of age. The same goes with Einstein. He developed his theories of general relativity and special relativity in that age group. You see, after that age group, we don't develop new ideas. We do all those ideas in that 16 to 26-year-old age group. And it's a time when we walk with the Holy Spirit through an exciting adventure of discovering what our powers of rationality are, what our powers of taking action. And it's a fantastic time, and we should not despise it. We should not allow our children to get discouraged into other things which take away their opportunity to do, because once they pass that age of 26, we go into a new phase, which I'm going to discuss in the next little talk, and that time of original thought and thinking is past, and we will never recover it. So these are the four phases, and we as parents or as teachers or whatever our responsibility is towards younger people need to recognise these four phases. One, the anima, the life force, perception, concentrating on perception and putting words on things we're seeing. Phase 2, concrete operations, when we begin to think about what we're seeing and distinguishing between what we're thinking, not just seeing, but actually thinking about what we're seeing. Third phase, getting revelation through the Holy Spirit, through a connection with the Holy Spirit, as to what the value of things is and what is beauty, what is beautiful, what is not beautiful. Getting revelations from God's standards. And the fourth revelation is actively pursuing an agency based on the fact that we understand the things around us, and we have got a connection with the Holy Spirit, and we're walking with Him through an adventure of discovery. I'll see you next time.